All good? Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
And welcome to our presentation of Our People, Their Stories, Oral Histories of Northern Tasmania. Thank you so very much for braving this awful weather. And that was the reason we started late, because there were a few people coming in. It started to pour now, so let's just hope it's eased off by the time you're ready to go home. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge and pay respect to the Tasmanian Aboriginal elders, both past, present and now emerging, to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the traditional owners and continuing custodians of this land where we meet today. It's my real pleasure to be introducing Jo Archer to you this morning. Jo has had a very diverse career, crossing farm life, small business, media, university sector and governance, and I think it's not up to me to be unwinding this story because she's going to be the person who can tell it best. But what I would say is that it's going to make an extraordinary addition to the collection of stories of northern Tasmania, given her diversity and the perspective that she has. Would you join me in welcoming Jo?
Thank you very much and for braving this weather, and thank you QV Mag friends for inviting me to talk to you today. Before I commence, I wish also to acknowledge and pay my respect to the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the traditional and original owners and ongoing custodians of this land on which we gather today. And I wish to acknowledge elders, past, present and emerging. This is really important for me. As a child, I was brought up to feel privileged to be part of one of Tasmania's oldest families, a seventh generation Archer. I was to be proud of the role that my family played in establishing Tasmania. However, as the truth relating to the nature and processes of European settlement have emerged, I must acknowledge that my ancestors were part of a cohort that was responsible for poor treatment of our Indigenous people, responsible for their displacement and the lack of regard for the fact that they had minded our land for over 40,000 years. And of that I'm not proud. A bit of Archer family history. 4 Archer brothers arrived in Tasmania in the 1820s from Hertford in England. Thomas Archer established Woolmer's Estate, Joseph Pansanga Estate, William Archer Brickenden Estate, and my direct ancestor Edward built my family home Northbury. Oh, I'm forgetting my slides. I did ask if I could have help, but I was told no. My family home Northbury. As you'll see, Northbury is a fine example of Italian Renaissance architecture and is located in Longford on the banks of the Lake River. It was run as a mixed farm, predominantly dairy, but we also ran some pigs and sheep. Northbury is now the much-loved home of Kenneth and Berta von Bibra. My father, Ludlow Vernon Archer, was born in 1896. His brothers, MacLeod and Tupper, both died when they were young. Dad served in the Australian Flying Corps in World War I and in World War II as a major in the Australian Electrical and Mechanical Engineers and had extensive overseas experience. My mother, Jean Cox, was born in Sydney in 1916 and was raised on her family's Mudgee property, but her connections to Tasmania were strong. Jean and her brother Jeff Cox were the great-great-grandchildren of James Cox, who built Clarendon House. Jean and Jeff's father, Trevor, was born at Clarendon, and they both retained a lifelong connection to Clarendon through their keen interest in history and decades of association with the National Trust. During the war, Northbury was one of the few Longford properties run completely by women. Mum, with the help of Australian Land Army girls, worked the property for about 4 years until Dad returned from the war. Fat lambs, butter and cereal were produced for export to the UK by these young women. Despite her heavy commitment on the farm, and with a small daughter, my sister Penelope, Mum also worked for the Red Cross, the Comforts Fund and the Girl Guide during the war years. Moving forward quite a few decades, news of my pending arrival came as a bit of a shock to my family. My mother was in her early 40s and my father in his early 60s, and I was not planned. You can probably imagine the awkwardness of such a situation in the small, tight community of Longford in the late 50s. I spent a lot of time with Dad, who in reality was more like a grandfather to me. I was his right-hand man and spent a great deal of my childhood bouncing around in his beloved World War II Jeep or under machinery, handing out tools as requested. I loved helping him feed out and milk cows and work on machinery. He made me go-karts and pedal carts, and he built up the pedals on that Jeep so I could drive when I was too short. I had a strange but happy childhood. By the time I was 10, Dad's physical and mental health was failing. Mum was under considerable strain to keep the farm running, manage the house and finances, and cope with her own health challenges. I spent a lot of time alone and with my four-legged mates. Because my siblings, Susanna, Nick and Penny, were either at boarding school or had commenced their careers by the time I was about 5, I grew up virtually as an only child. I idolised my brother Nick. He was naughty, handsome, wild, and loved machinery and fast cars. And he provided me with a potential stream of in-laws who would indulge me to seek family favour. I was a tomboy of note. I was a strong kid, dark-skinned, capable, and did not like dresses or hairdos or jewellery or girl magazines. Susanna, in contrast, was tiny, feminine and glamorous, and always immaculately groomed. And Penny, by the time I was 7, was married and had produced my first nephew. Mum ran the show at Northbury. She managed the books, business and logistics. She grew our veggies, managed a large house, and was a busy mum and a very active community volunteer. Her constant association with guiding National Trust in the RSL stretched over 40 years. She was a very intelligent woman, but like many women of her time, growing up in the Great Depression had no opportunity for tertiary education. It didn't hold her back much. She was determined and courageous and strong, an avid reader, researcher, historian and businesswoman, and later in life an activist. This was all when she wasn't playing golf or bridge. I am most grateful to Mum for her broad-mindedness, particularly in the conservative 50s and 60s in a very traditional community that boasted no cultural diversity. Her thinking was more contemporary, and that often caused consternation amidst her peers. Because of Mum's wide social and community interests, there was a constant stream of artists and authors and oddbods passing through Northbury, people from all walks of life, with strange clothes and wacky ideas. She loved people who were different, and so did I. In her later life, she became quite active in her support of the Greens and their efforts to protect our wild places. I clearly remember her major dilemma as a rusted-on Liberal voter, making the decision to spoil her ballot as a means of expressing her objection to the damming of the Franklin River. She loved a challenging a discussion, particularly about politics, and was often the most controversial guest at my dinner table. Excuse me one moment. Because of the pressures on Mum, I had enormous freedom as a child. So long as I completed my chores and was with my dog, I could wander just about anywhere. I'd been taught to swim, Dad's way, at the end of a rope in the Lake River, and to be safe around animals and machinery and the property. What could possibly go wrong? I loved the farm. I explored every nook and cranny, hedge, shed and ditch and roadway, and I was happiest around the animals. My passion was horses. I did and continue to love them, their nobility, kindness and strength. Mum had ridden it in her youth and I followed in her footsteps, riding from a very early age. That's my sister Susanna on that horse with me there. Riding gave me even more independence. It became my means of transport, to explore further afield, to visit friends on nearby farms and to move around the district and village of Longford. I will remember riding out to visit Tam Foster and the Patterson family at Harwick Hill and the Thomases at Gayfield and the Archers at Brickenden. My riding continued through the years of Pony Club, showing, eventing and riding to hounds, firstly with the Midland Hunt Club and later with the Northern Hunt Club. And I see one of my old hunting buddies, Wayne Deering, here right now. In my early teens, I was taken under the wing of one of Tasmania's most accomplished equestrians and my horsey hero, Rhoda Sayer from Rhodes Estate. And you may remember Rhoda. She was a tiny, eccentric and amazing horsewoman who had an enormous black horse called Black Watch. And at every show I ever went to, that was my first port of call, was to find Black Watch. Rhoda gave me lessons in return for riding her horses competitively. I have fond memories of time spent at Rhodes, helping Rhoda care for her mother, Mrs. Gatenby, and collecting what seemed like thousands of eggs and feeding Rhoda's huge flock of chooks and, of course, her beloved horses. I continued to ride into my 40s before giving it up to avoid nagging back injuries and work pressure and to take up my new passion of scuba diving. I was expected to pull my weight on the farm, while childhood chores involved caring for dogs and chooks and bringing in wood and coal. My level of responsibility grew. By the time I was in my early teens, the farm could not support full-time workers and I had to step up. I helped tend pigs and calves and became proficient in milking and cleaning the dairy. We all chipped in for the endless task of moving irrigation pipes in those days, no pivot irrigators then, and farm maintenance and managing large gardens. But while my workload was heavy, life on the farm was fun. Our large kitchen was a hub. Everything went on there. The combustion stove kept it cosy and welcoming and was the source of great meals and great treats. On frosty mornings, there would be baskets of brand new lambs or chickens warming up around the stove or even in the warming oven. Life revolved around the kitchen table, family battles, and there were many, homework, ironing, business transactions, card games, fruit bottling, and the odd veterinary procedure. In one corner was the old Bendix constantly rumbling away, and the Bakelite radio delivering the vitally important weather, flood and livestock reports, and of course Blue Hills. I loved the constant stream of visitors, bank managers, stock and stationed agents, product and machinery reps, who always seemed to arrive at lunchtime and who brought news of other families and farms. There were also visits from the Rawleys man, the fish truck, Mr. Whippy, and a range of other travelling vendors. And at Christmas, the Salvation Army would turn up and play and sing carols on our front lawn. These were times of great excitement. My favourite time of the year was hay harvest. It was all hands on deck, and it was often Christmas Day, Boxing Day. I was set to mowing, raking and baling hay, but bringing in the hay from the paddocks was my best and a very social time. My brother's mates would converge to help with the task. I would drive the truck, they would load up, and while the job would get done, there was much mischief, hell and hijinks along the way. Life wasn't all about horses and work in my teens. I was also a keen surfer and open water sailor and have great memories of summer breaks at our old Coles Bay shack. And I mean shack. Dunny can loo, candle and tilly lamp lighting, gas fridge, chip heater and tank water. It was very basic. Coles Bay offered a new kind of freedom, time spent with those holiday friends. roaming beaches, swimming and paddling and hiking and exploring, with the only proviso to be home before dark. I've always been drawn to adventurous pursuits. I've been a keen rafter, I've done some caving, skydiving, and scuba diving became a key pursuit for 20 years. Oh, I didn't show you my pictures. Now a little about my education. It didn't start or end well. While I regularly ran away from preschool and walked home via farms to avoid mum, I did enjoy my time at Longford Primary, but have some odd memories. Longford Primary was an environment where kids were made to feel equal and where we had wonderful teachers and teachers who understood us and where we came from. My most vivid memories, however, are odd. I loved flavoured milk and goiter tablets. I shudder when recalling as a large and uncoordinated kid participating in compulsory ballet lessons with Kenneth Gillespie in the school kitchen on the old lino floor with the odours of post-lunch. Some of you will remember Kenneth. He was beautiful, immaculately presented, sophisticated and exotic, and he did not belong in our school kitchen. I attended Broadland for my secondary education, and that was not a happy experience for me or Broadland. I was an unremarkable student academically, a reasonable sports person, but never felt comfortable in that tucked-in environment where a diverse group of kids were expected to conform to a single, and dare I say, very outdated education system, and where class and status seemed to be important. I always felt inadequate. My family was not wealthy, and I knew what a financial battle it was for me to send me there. And that was not the case for all students. Whether real or perceived, I felt that there existed a them and us vibe. My most terrifying experience at Broadland was plain clothes day. It was great to hide behind a uniform, but on those days we were showed up. And I became incredibly creative in my excuses and methods for non-attendance. I think this is nerves making me thirsty. I suspect that Broadland heaved a sigh of relief when I left after grade 10 and headed to Matric. Matric College was a considerably more relaxed environment. So relaxed, in fact, that I decided I would leave. I decided without any consultation that I needed a job. I needed to help out at home and I wasn't enjoying school. So I got myself a job at Barringer and Lansdell as the office junior. I still caught the bus to and from work every day, and it was quite some time before my change of circumstances was discovered by the college, and then of course by mum, but it was too late by then. My career as an office junior wasn't a great success, and at that time my dad's health was failing. So I went home and for several months worked on the farm and shared the responsibility of milking. By this stage I was running pretty wild. Mum and I clashed and Dad's dementia was worsening, and he and I were both becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Quite out of the blue, Edith de Vermond approached me with an offer of a job at Capri Corset Salon. In hindsight, I suspect that offer was probably inspired by Mum sharing her despair in dealing with me. I accepted that offer and my life changed. Edith was a unique character, a woman well ahead of her time. She was fashionable and sophisticated and very vocal, and one of Launceston's very few businesswomen. Scandalously, she was also a divorcee and a single mother. That was very exciting to me because I'd never come across those before. The Brisbane Street Barons ignored Edith despite her success and her strong business acumen. Of course, many of those traditional businesses have gone, while Capri has evolved and adapted and is still in operation. Edith's progressive ideas challenged many. She believed in mind over matter and that attitude was more important than skill, and that women needed to be independent and take responsibility for their own destinies. These were revolutionary ideas at the time. Edith took me on as a project. I was given guidance about my appearance, my deportment, grammar, wardrobe, behaviour, choice of friends, and the consequences of non-compliance were tough. I trained as a corseteer and loved the task of working to make people feel safe and comfortable in such a personal environment. My particular focus was on helping people with challenging needs, including those needing therapeutic help. I visited clients in hospitals pre and post childbirth and worked with women dealing with breast cancer and surgery. Remember, this is 45 years ago. Those women were so vulnerable, coping with the fear of the cancer and the associated treatments and the psychological impacts of mastectomy. And of course, in the 70s, unlike today, survival rates were poor. Perhaps my most enlightening role was working with transgender customers who in those conservative times were incredibly isolated. Two customers I remember well were big burly blokes who worked in the mines at Zen. They would arrive after closing time under the cover of darkness, and Edith and I would smuggle them in and kick them out. While naturally this all occurred in a respectful manner, we had many laughs in the process. And I was grateful to learn from those two gentle giants. While Capri's core clientele was privileged, there were many people who needed but could not afford specialist services. No one was turned away. Between Edith's personal generosity and her persuasiveness with suppliers, philanthropists and doctors, she helped hundreds of people to access essential treatments that improved their lives. It was during my time at Capri that my father died. As with most farm kids, death was no stranger to me, and I remember my relief that Dad's discomfort was over. He died on his birthday, which is slightly ironic. For as long as I could remember, Dad had issued me with a pre-birthday warning that I was not to buy him a gift because he was so old that he wouldn't live long enough to wear it out. So I thought a birthday death was very appropriate. I was planning to tell you in detail about each and every one of my jobs, but I'm going to try and skim through a bit or you could be here for days. After leaving Capri, I joined the Examiner, working under the strict supervision of Albert Van Zetten and Peter Cooper and Brian McKendrick. Some of you will remember them, and they were tough. I loved the newspaper industry and the excitement of the news, the deadlines, the smell of the print and the interaction with a great array of clients. At 19, it was time to broaden my horizons and see more of the world. I headed to Melbourne to work for Leader Newspapers, a privately owned media firm with 20 mastheads. During the time I worked at Leader, I became their first ever female manager. I can't help thinking about Misrepresented when recalling that was incredibly inconvenient in that very staid environment because there were no female loos. As you'll appreciate, I was like a kid in a lolly shop in Melbourne. Longford girl goes to big smoke. My eyes were opened and my world expanded. I ate spaghetti that was not out of a tin. And I learnt about wine and I interacted with people from culturally diverse backgrounds. I shared a house with two male friends who took me under their wings and introduced me to Melbourne's cultural scene, to the worlds of sophisticated restaurants and galleries and theatre and ballet and opera. One of my flatmates, Brett, was an opera singer and arts writer and moved in very colourful and, to me, risque circles. We hosted many post-rehearsal performances and parties that attracted hordes of Melbourne's finest and most flamboyant thespians who were nothing like the folk I'd dealt with at Longford. My other flatmate, David, later became my husband. David then worked in the emerging fine food and wine industry in Victoria. We married when I was 21, far too young, and led a very decadent life of restaurants and travel, and later both returned to Tasmania where I set up Leader Newspapers' Tasmanian division. David's and my marriage did not last, but together we managed a very congenial divorce and 35 years on remain firm friends. After leaving Leader newspapers, I worked freelance on a range of projects, including the setup of Tasmanian Country and the Southern Star newspapers. And one of my favourite roles was handling the commercial operations for the World Sheep and Wool Congress that was held here in 1988, Tasmania's largest ever event, attracting 2,000 international delegates. As an aside, it was that time in 1988 that I joined the QV Mag Gallery Guides under the supervision of Diane Dunbar, but I digress. I went on to become marketing manager for the show, again exposing me to all sorts of people, from very, important farmers, to members of the Showman's Guild, to artists and commercial exhibitors and media, and of course at times passionate and quite militant folk from every animal breed society and the Women's Industry Committee. My advice and my key learning was to never stand in the way of a cavey or cat breeder or a woman with a sponge. Thank you, Mark. One of my achievements at the time of the show was to work with Sandy Campbell, who I know is known to you all. And together, Sandy and I established Tasmania's first ever Contemporary Art Award, which was quite revolutionary at the time as there was no outlet for contemporary artists. And that continued very successfully for probably 10 years. By this time when I was in my early 30s, I'd enjoyed fabulous roles, but I knew I had to address my education deficit. So it was at that time I ended up in UTAS's inaugural MBA program and entered perhaps the most stressful period of my life to date. I had no knowledge of academic environments or their processes or requirements, and no notion of how to approach tertiary studies. It was after 3 very stressful years of part-time study, many tears, and an absence of a social life, I achieved my graduate management qualification. From the Show Society, I went on to be sales manager for the Tasmanian Convention Bureau, and for many years fought hard to seek equity for Northern Tasmania in securing conference and meetings business. And from there went to the Chamber of Commerce, where for 10 years I worked with the city leaders to enhance business opportunities and outcomes for the region. The overriding lessons for me there were to learn about the power of independence, of collaboration, and the generosity of mentors. My decision to leave the Chamber was a response to the proposed pulp mill. Initially a supporter of that concept, I worked with Guns and the task force on the project, and the more I learned, the smellier the whole deal became, environmentally, socially and financially. I was invited to join an independent study group to visit like mills in Sweden and Germany and Portugal, and what I learned only increased my sense of unease. It was a very stressful time, personally and professionally, I know for many of us. The Chamber Board was divided in its views about the mills, and I felt very compromised that I couldn't openly express my concerns and findings, and eventually the Chamber's official stance and my values could no longer live together. While for so many people that debate was destructive, it also taught our community about social licence and the power of the people. On a personal level, the pulp mill issue exposed me to an underground world of dozens of people, mostly female, who, like me, were not openly able to voice their opposition to the project for fear of employment or business reprisals. For many of us, our shared dilemma proved to be quite a bonding experience, and 10 years on, we remain close confidants. My last job was a 6-year stint as Engagement and Development Manager for the university. That role was about building links between UTAS and its external communities. And let me tell you, that was not as easy as it sounds. A highlight of my time at UTAS was working with refugee and Muslim communities. I worked closely with a group of young African men. Most had fled war-torn Sudan. And these damaged and statuesque souls were so vulnerable and so much in need of mentoring. But with the help of local police, wonderful mentors and UTAS, we established the All Stars Soccer Club, which not only allowed these boys to excel, but also opened up relationships and networks to help them settle and feel welcome. Also, while at UTAS, it became apparent that while our community benefits financially and in terms of medical capacity from our Muslim community, we offered them no place to observe their faith. I was very proud to drive a process of securing funding and developing a purpose-built prayer facility at UTAS, and in engaging media and peak bodies to attempt to build understanding of the Muslim faith and of the people in our region. I'll always be grateful to the members of these communities for helping broaden my horizons. For the past 6 years, I've operated my own consultancy business and work for a range of clients by providing corporate and community engagement services. Corporate governance has been a key interest over the past 20 years. After achieving my company director's diploma, I've served on several boards, including St Giles, the National Trust and several RACT entities. Currently a fellow of the Institute of Company Directors, I recently served as a state councillor and am soon to complete my time as a director of RACT after almost 15 years. Reflecting on my personal background has reminded me of how fortunate I've been to engage in many sectors and how one opportunity kept opening the next door. I've had a very fortunate work journey. Malcolm, I'm honoured. Now, on to more frivolous things. It's hard to get these things in order, and I haven't told you about the most important parts of my life: my husband, home, and travels. Let me set the scene. In my early 30s, I took up scuba diving and trained to achieve master status. I was obsessed with the joy of accessing that underwater world and dived regularly in Tasmania, interstate, and around the world. While I did take the odd cray or abalone, my focus was on underwater bushwalking. In those days, my home away from home was the Eagle Hawk Dive Centre, and quite by chance, I was running that dive centre for a couple of weeks while waiting to start my job at the Chamber, while the owners were away in Europe. It was there that I met my husband, Stuart, who turned up to book in for a week's diving. He'd recently immigrated to Australia and was beginning a year-long tour before deciding where he would settle. He had no chance once I met him. Despite his very scruffy backpacker appearance, I spotted the potential, and as they say, the rest is history. And after 23 years, he scrubbed up beautifully. Stuart is the love of my life. He's charming, handsome, intelligent, funny, and a very progressive thinker. A teacher by profession, he's passionate about equipping young people not only to achieve good academic results, but to become good global citizens and to follow their passion in their careers. He's currently the head of senior school at Scotch College. Stuart came with extras. Having lost my dad at an early age and not having a close family, I'm so grateful to have a fabulous relationship with my 92-year-old father-in-law and Stu's two sisters, one in the UK and one in South Africa. Apart from the fact that they're wonderful people, between them I have a chef, a winemaker, a top safari guide and a pilot, so they're very handy as well. Now, 24 years later, Stu and I live happily ever after at our Lagana hobby farm. Our cosy little cottage is nestled in a rustic country garden, and we grow most of our own veggies and fruit. And like most childless people, we are ridiculously dotty about our Westies, Griffin and Alfie, with whom we share the property, and 3 gorgeous horses. Stu and I are keen travellers. While I'd travelled to the UK and Europe and the Pacific and the States in my younger days, we seem to follow paths less travelled. We visit South Africa regularly and have over 20 years spent months exploring all the southern African countries: Namibia, Botswana, Mauritius, Lesotho, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique and Swaziland. And we regularly return to our favourite destination, the Okavango Delta in Botswana. Diving has been the catalyst for many trips to the Pacific. And pre-COVID, we had the wonderful experiences of spending time in Myanmar, Thailand, India and Canada. It's the opportunity to learn about different cultures that fires our travel appetite. It's not just about the wild animals and places or architecture or history. For us, it's about the people and their ways. We have a few rules when we travel. I've just got some pics from my last trip to India there because I love the people. Our rules when we travel. First rule is that we must get off the beaten track and mingle and eat and spend time with locals. Our second rule is never to stay in a commercial hotel or resort, or in fact anywhere that has a lift. We prefer to stay in locally owned and operated accommodation where we can be immersed in the local way of life. And our third rule is not to wing in and out of destinations, but to go for several weeks or months, and only go when we've really got that time to explore. I could, but I don't have time, regale you with a dozen stories of breaking a leg hiking in Samoa, or being detained on suspicion of spying by the Zambian military, or spending time with Sikh pilgrims in India, of the many terrific and terrifying incidents with African animals, or of being desperate to pee while trapped between trucks in a military cavalcade on the world's highest roads in India. So many memories in another time. While COVID has put a stop to our international travels, it has encouraged us to explore Australia. And just recently we returned from the Kimberley and far north Queensland, and we were reminded that the vastness of this country, of the vastness of our own country and of our own extraordinary cultures, history, landscapes and features. What does the future hold? While I continue to work, if and when roles I am passionate come my way, I do have a game plan for the next phase of my life. I remain a keen gardener and I love to cook and entertain and read. I spend several hours each week walking, swimming, exercising, and have recently started to learn golf and bridge. In the next year, I'll start planning to move to a new home with less land and less work, so it's easier to lock up and leave when we travel. Volunteering is in my DNA, and I'll continue to support and engage with activities that enhance the well-being of this community. And along the way, I want to attempt to have more time to read and be at peace and become more a passenger of life. In winding up this diatribe, I want to share some insights. Recently, I was asked two questions. The first was, for what am I grateful? I'm grateful for being white, born white, and I'm grateful for having the means to fend for myself, feed myself and determine my own journey. And my travels have shown me that most people in the world can't boast these luxuries, particularly people of colour. I'm grateful for living a life that's exposed me to such an array of people and cultures. And I'm grateful for being born into a safe and democratic, if not very kind, country. I'm grateful for living in the Tamar Valley, surrounded by beauty and love and good friends, and having a charmed life. And I'm grateful to be alive, healthy, and having so many people who've taken time to mentor and support me professionally and personally. I'm grateful for my husband, my friends, and my community. And I'm grateful for surviving and coping with a long period of depression. The other question I was asked was about what keeps me awake at night. And that was a long list. I worry about social injustice, about climate change and the legacy that my generation's excesses on future generations of humans and all things. I cannot imagine how small and often poor, low-lying countries see their land, their homes, their history and their livelihoods disappear, while greedy polluters continue to focus on building wealth. As the daughter of a veteran of the war to end all wars, I wonder if humans will ever stop destroying themselves. I worry that young people are too indulged and not developing the resilience and the skills they will need to face the challenges ahead. I'm saddened by the level of racism in the world and in fact in our community, and by the cruel judgment of difference, be that otherness relating to gender or sexual orientation or race. And I'm ashamed of my country's way of dealing with refugees. And I hope that if I or those I care about ever become refugees, they find a kinder welcome in other countries. I wonder why success is measured in terms of economic growth and wealth and material things. Why don't we talk about people's well-being and equity and inclusion and about their health or access to food and water? Our system isn't sustainable. I wonder if as a society we will ever attempt to support people when they are young, to help them through the traumas that are so often the precursors to a life of homelessness, addiction or violence. It's this list of things that keep me awake that are the things that have driven my involvement with the Tamar Community Peace Trust. So bear with me for another 5 minutes. I'm hoping I've got time to talk to you about the trust. I'm on time, I think. About 10 years ago, I received a call from Mrs. Jean Hearn, summoning me to visit her for tea and a chat. I'd heard of Jean, but I did not know her well. For background, Jean was born in 1921 in Launceston and attended MLC. In 1940, she married Frederick Howe, with whom she had one child. Tragically, Mr. Howe died in a POW camp in Java, and Jean later married Alfred Hearn, with whom she had 3 children. In 1954, Jean joined the Australian Labor Party, and in 1980 was appointed to fill a vacant Senate seat, becoming the first female Tasmanian ALP senator. She was elected for 2 more terms and retired in 1985. When I first arrived at Jean's charming Balfour Street College, I was greeted by a tiny and gentle woman who, due to failing physical health, was almost housebound. First impressions are not always accurate. Jean was diminutive in stature only. She was focused, determined and persistent, and possessed an amazing capacity to build networks of supporters. Literally hundreds of community leaders were enticed to her home for a tea and a chat, and they all left with a task. Age was no barrier to Jean, who was in her early 90s at the time. She was actively engaged in lobbying governments, councils, and major institutions to improve services and ensure equitable outcomes for people in our community. She hosted meetings of prominent Launcestonians that she called the Grey Cabinet. That impressive band of stalwarts, who had already given years or decades of service to our community, included people like Faith Layton and Molly Campbell-Smith and Margot Smart and Don Wing, Coleman O'Flaherty, Peter Ray and several others. Jean would identify appropriate decision makers who had the power and influence to address the problems identified by the Green Cabinet, and it became my job to get them to her door. It was with amazement that I watched on as premiers, politicians, vice-chancellors, academics and numerous corporate and community leaders were treated to tea and a chat. I suspect many of those visitors left with new perspectives. And Jean had their phone numbers. They were never going to be safe. It was during my visits with Jean that she shared her passion for peace. It had not been enough for Jean that people hoped for peace. She believed they wanted to be more active, but did not know what to do. She believed that they wanted guidance about how they as individuals could create change in our community to improve harmony and cohesion in our homes, our schools and our workplaces. Jean, like me, was very inspired by the 2014 Anzac Day address by the late Tasmanian Governor Peter Underwood AC. Governor Underwood issued a challenge to all Tasmanians to actively strive for peace on a daily basis and to learn ways of resolving conflict without violence. He challenged us, in remembrance of all those who died or were damaged in war, to do something to create peace. Jean took up Governor Underwood's challenge by establishing the Tamer Community Peace Trust to deliver the following objectives. I'm not sure if you can read them, but I'll read them for you. The objectives were to raise awareness of peace issues through the arts, education and the media, to promote peaceful strategies for resolving conflict at all levels, from personal, community to international, to translate the desire for peace into action and to offer people, especially young people, a course for hope and a motive for action, to build a world free from injustice, threats of war and violence, and to encourage the artist in every one of us to express peace as a way of overcoming violence. The trustees and Jean decided on 2 key courses of action to promote peace. One was to establish a peace garden and the other to host a community festival of peace. The inaugural Peace Garden? The inaugural Festival of Peace was held in 2016. Jean was firm in her view that the festival should not be an event delivered to the community, that it must be an activity that grew from the community. This was quite a mind shift for me. I'm a power junkie and I was used to arranging things and organising them and telling people how they'd be done. And she taught me to provide a platform and let the community rise up, and they've done it. Jean wanted us to provide that stage on which individuals in all areas of the community could demonstrate their ways of promoting goodwill, harmony and equality. During our past 4 festivals, hundreds of community groups have come forward and hosted festival activities to share their messages of peace with thousands of participants. Jean died in November 2017, aged 96, knowing that she had made a difference in encouraging our community to be kinder. The 5th annual festival will run this year from the 1st to the 7th of August. I'm just going to take you back to the Peace Garden for a moment. This Peace Garden was built in 2016 by the Trust with great support from the City of Launceston, the WD Booth Estate and a range of private donors. The garden was opened by Mrs. Frances Underwood, and for anybody interested in an amazing speech, it's on our website and it's worth taking 10 minutes to read it. It's very beautiful and interesting. The following words were read on behalf of Jean at the opening of the garden. This garden at the head of our beautiful Tamer River is a place of peace and contemplation, a place to think about ways we can stop the terrible violence in our world. It is a place to think about how we can make our communities stronger, more cohesive and kindlier. For kindness is the key to peace. Kindness starts with individuals and extends into communities. Kind communities have no place for violence or assaults. Let us extend our individual kindness to our war-plagued world. It is fitting that this garden has been established near the memorial for the Tasmania's 2nd 40th Battalion, which was captured by the Japanese in February 1942. Among the prisoners who died during the following 3 years were my husband Fred Howe and his brother Bert. The Peace Garden is a place for remembrance. It is a symbol demonstrating that our community cares about peace. I hope it will be visited often and will foster ideas and attitudes that will promote peace and help create kind and caring communities. Pretty amazing legacy. So, to the festival for this year. There are brochures on the seats. Please feel free to take them and any spares that you have for friends and family. The Peace Festival will run in Launceston from the 1st to the 7th of August, which is a bit shorter this year, but we've reduced things a bit because of COVID. So I encourage you to become involved in this great range of activities that are offered. I'm going to share some of them with you because there are many that come in after our brochures are printed and register and that are not on our website. But you might be interested to hear just a little about the diversity offered. We kick off at the weekend with a community walk on Sunday at Royal Park, and at that walk we're going to celebrate newcomers to Launceston, and those newcomers might be refugees, they might be our professional newcomers, of whom there are many, and the goal of that walk is to engage them in the community, to meet other locals, and for our locals to actually meet some people meet some new people as well. Perhaps our major event that aligns with our recovery theme for this of Peace in Recovery this year will be our Lindy Chamberlain in conversation with Dr. Fiona Reynolds. This event will be delivered in partnership with the Tamar Valley Writers Festival on Thursday the 5th of August, and should be a very moving and enlightening event. There will be such activities as Poetry for Peace at the Royal Oak, or a special Spanish peace radio program for our Spanish-speaking communities. There'll be exhibitions of artwork in response to peace by artists at Interweave and at Masonic Care. There'll be a Tamar Bike Users Group Peace Ride. There'll be art exhibitions at the tail race, a peace service at the City Baptist Church, and a highlight for many people is the Singing for Peace on Sunday the 1st at Pilgrim Church, where many of our local choirs bring joy to the audiences. There'll be circle dancing and public speaking on matters of peace at Rostrum and Toastmasters. There'll be an event called the Road to Recovery at the Kingsway Bar, which is an evening of poetry, comedy, and music and stories, where local artists will join as they share their art and stories of finding peace in their own recovery. There'll be a cultural treasures market and a QV Mag floor talk of stories on peace. There's another activity called In It Together, which is a participatory choral ceremony that can include any voice or instrument, although they warn that if bagpipes turn up, they may be sent off stage. And perhaps just one more example to give you an idea of the diversity of the program is the pole dancing pop-up exhibition. And this I had to nip into the website and get some information on myself. It did take my interest. And that exhibition acknowledges the patient's revival and strength associated with recovery from bullying and sexual assault. The exhibition will be accompanied by a performance that showcases the skill and endurance of the pole dance. To heal is to replace trauma with kindness, to feel your power and feel at peace. So take a look at our program. You'll see that it's pretty much covered everybody's interests. There's an afternoon with Matthew Evans out at the Northern Suburbs Community Centre. There are activities for people who want to enjoy passive and reflective events, or those that want to get their hands dirty digging. Lastly, I need to tell you about our Peace in Schools program, a program that wouldn't happen, I might add, without the support of the W.D. Booth Estate. Again, thank you, Jill. The Peace in Schools program is an activity delivered in a partnership between UTAS and the Tamar Valley Peace Trust. And it's an activity designed to help equip children with the tools to build their resilience to deal with and recover from challenges. We know that so many young people battle to deal with their challenges and feel hopeless and often unequipped to find strategies and a way through. The guest speaker for our program this year is a young man called Matt Etherington, who's a young solicitor passionate about delivering high-impact, innovative solutions to social problems. In tackling exclusion, he claims to cultivate healthier and more just communities. He believes in the power of dialogue and empathy and lived experience and vulnerability to break down barriers. His goal is to invest in young people so they can realise their potential to help others. He's a very impressive young man, and again, there's much more about him on our website. But in addition to Matt actually attending and participating in a range of school assemblies in programs or workshops working directly with young people, he will be delivering a presentation at this year by popular demand and a request of Jill Deering, is to live stream his presentation to any school in Tasmania who would like to participate. For so many years we've been approached by schools in other regions wanting to enjoy our festival program, and we haven't the resources to do that. But this year with UTAS and its capacity, any school who wants to participate in Matt's presentations or workshops will be able to. So in winding up, I'd like to thank you for hearing me out and invite you to join us for the festival and do your bit to helping us build a more peaceful and passive society. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Jo.
Pleasure.
Absolutely fascinating life. I know we're a bit pressed for time, so I can't go over all the wonderful points I'd like to explore further, and I'm sure there are people in the audience who would too. So I think probably I've got everyone's thoughts coming to me, and we have a plan for your retirement. Write a book. It was truly very, very enjoyable, and one of the little benefits for me was I found someone who, like me, enjoyed goited. I've never been able to confess that before. Oh, another one. There you go, a secret society. But it was fascinating from your childhood in Longford, an area I know well, and your very, very interesting experience with the Capri lady who told me on my first visit with my mother to her establishment that you can't make mountains out of molehills. And lots of other things that just sort of resonated so much, but it was fantastic. Your photographs were beautiful, your travels look absolutely fascinating, and your husband is a man to die for. I taught with him at Launceston College as an absolute special person, wonderful educator, state education's loss. He moved to Scotland. But anyway, thank you, Jo.
Thank you.
Just wonderful.
And I'm sorry I went over time.
Our next speaker has certain similarities with Jo, but he's also very, very different. This is Adam Page, who writes Adam Page, who writes the Humans of Launceston column on Facebook, you may be familiar with. He has had many jobs, mainly labouring in road construction, buildings, truck driving, very, very physical life, but he has found his great love now and is settled in aged care. Really, really interesting guy. He's also spent many, many years as not an Elvis impersonator, but a tribute artist, so you never know what we might be in for. And a really diverse personality, and his career is a reflection of the man who ultimately says it's kindness, it's all about kindness, and that's where I think Jo's career goes as well. So thank you, hope we do see you next week. I just regret that we had one of the biggest acceptance rates today, as you can see by the flyers on the seats. But I think it was a combination of the weather and probably the lousy parking that's here now that might have put some people off. So thank you very much for coming, and hope to see you next month. Thank you.